It's Sunday, January 2nd. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lirio channel. And on Thursday, the 30th of December, the worst wildfire in Colorado history occurred when the Marshall Fire, ignited by strong downslope winds, took out nearly 1,000 structures. And a short-lived fire driven by strong downslope winds from the same low-pressure area that brought record-breaking snowfall here in the Sierra Nevada mountains, nearly 17 feet in the High Sierra, and leaving still today, a week later, nearly 10,000 people in our local area without power. Let's go inside and take a closer look at what happened on the Marshall Fire near Boulder, Colorado. Starting with Bill Gabbert's Wildfire Today blog post, County Sheriff says 991 structures destroyed in Marshall Fire southeast of Boulder, Colorado. This is as of 1 January. County authorities have released a preliminary list of the addresses of structures that were destroyed or damaged in the Marshall Fire. And I'll give you the link below, but here's an exact list of the exact structures that were destroyed. According to the Denver Gazette, Saturday evening, 3 people are missing and feared dead in the wake of the Marshall Fire, the Boulder County Sheriff said Saturday afternoon, and nearly 1,000 structures have been destroyed, making the blaze by far the most destructive in Colorado history. Now, here's a map of the Marshall Fire. This was driven by strong downslope winds, more on that in a minute, from the west. So the fire moved from the west to the east. So looking at this map from left to right. Now, investigators are looking at what caused the fire. The initial thought was that perhaps it was these power lines along this highway. What is that, 92 or 93? That's 93. But now they're beginning to look at possible human activity, and I suspect the ignition source for this fire is right there. And if you look at that on the Google map, that corresponds to a trailhead entry parking lot area. And then the fire spread quickly to the east, surrounding a bit of Marshall Lake, and then taking out various subdivisions. This fire was only 6,000 acres, but here's a breakdown on the structures. Louisville destroyed 553, damaged 45. Superior, Colorado, 332, destroyed 60, damaged. And in the county, 106 destroyed, 32 damage. They don't specify how many of these structures are homes. Therefore, the numbers include backyard sheds and other small uninhabited buildings. What caused the Marshall Fire? Boulder County has clarified information that was previously received about the cause of the fire in a press conference Friday morning. The sheriff told reporters that someone told fire authorities that there was a down power line near where the fire started, but the origin and cause investigators had not examined the scene, he said, and the specified cause had not yet been confirmed. No downed power lines had been located in the area of the origin. There were some downed telecommunication lines, but these are not likely to have started the blaze because there's little or no power in the telecom lines. It's the power lines that they're of concern. The sheriff did confirm that one search warrant has been obtained, but he declined to release any additional information on the location or the reason for the warrant. Now, if you look at the preliminary fire map here and this particular point of interest right here, and look that same point up on the Google Maps, that corresponds roughly to this bend in the Highway 93, just north and west of Marshall Lake, and corresponds to the Marshall Mesa Trailhead and El Dorado Park and Ride area. If we go down and take a look at that, here's the power lines that run parallel to Highway 93 and perpendicular to the strong westerly winds, was the first possible ignition source for this fire. But maybe possibly there was some human activity here in this parking lot area or over on the trailhead parking lot area, possibly investigators are looking at. Now, if we take a look at the near where the fire started, take a look at the fuels that they were working with. Grass, it's light, flashy fuel. So this area has been, of course, in a area of high drought. Everything's dried out. They haven't received much precipitation. And as we look off towards the west, towards the high terrain, you can see a number of valleys coming down out of the Rockies towards Boulder, Colorado, which funnels these winds into this area. And this fuel, all dried out with the occasional juniper and brush, is a light, flashy fuel that can allow the fire and embers to move very, very rapidly in a wind-driven event. This was completely a wind-driven event. Here on a tweet from Hart Van Denberg, you can get an idea of the winds driving this event. This is after the fire had gotten into the subdivisions, and listen to the wind blow.
Crouched down on the hillside next to Colorado 128 and watch the flames tear through Superior subdivision.
So they're talking winds 40, 50, 60 knots, upwards of 100 miles an hour at times, making this an extreme wind-driven fire event. When a wind-driven fire event like this occurs, similar to what we had happen here in Paradise, California, there is nothing that first responders can do other than escape and evacuate. There is no putting out the fire. There's absolutely nothing air resources can do because it's simply much too windy to safely operate any aircraft. All you can do is escape, evacuate, get out of its way, and wait for the winds to die down and the weather to change, which it did. By the end of the day, the winds had died down. The fire was contained at just 6,000 acres, and by the next day it was snowing. So what causes these strong front-range winds? Well, this is an example weather chart. This isn't exactly the weather chart for the time period in question, but we had a low-pressure area here off of California that connected with some tropical moisture, and this low brought a lot of cold air with it, which gave us the heavy, wet snowfall here in the Sierra Nevada mountains. This low pressure moves the jet stream up across the Rocky Mountains. So what happens when these strong surface winds hit a mountain range like the Rockies? Well, it rises. But it rises and falls at a different state of energy based on the lapse rate, the adiabatic lapse rate. As we know here in the lower atmosphere, as you go up in altitude, the temperature decreases. The temperature decreases at a couple of different rates. One way of looking at this is the standard adiabatic lapse rate, which is about 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit per 1,000 feet, or 2 degrees Celsius per 1,000 feet, or for all the rest of the world, about 6.5 degrees Celsius per 1,000 meters would be your standard lapse rate, standard atmosphere. But what happens in reality? On the west side of the mountains, this moist air rises, condenses, precipitates out, and it changes at a rate of change equivalent to the moist adiabatic lapse rate. Once all this moisture is squeezed out of these clouds, these winds descend at a dry adiabatic lapse rate, which is a much higher lapse rate. So here we see the moist adiabatic lapse rate is about 3.3 degrees Fahrenheit per 1,000 feet. You're losing energy slower in moist air. And the dry adiabatic lapse rate is 5.5 degrees per 1,000 feet. So you're gaining temperature at a much higher rate as the winds come down the backside of the Rockies. So if you look at the temperature that the day this occurred in Boulder, Colorado, here on Thursday, December 30th, in the morning when this fire hit, when these winds hit, there was a sharp rise in the temperature from 28 to nearly 48 degrees. That's brought on because of those descending, warming Chinook or Fane winds coming out of the Rocky Mountains at the dry adiabatic lapse rate of 5.5 degrees per 1,000 feet. So these high temperature descending winds accelerate down the front range of the Rocky Mountains and get funneled by these various canyons right into the Boulder, Colorado area where this fire started, and then right into these subdivisions located nearby. And as you can see, these houses are located very close to one another. Beautiful subdivisions, but once one house goes, nearly all of them goes. You got the radiant heat of the house so close to each other that they're all going to tend to go up nearly simultaneously. And all it takes is some embers ripping through the neighborhood here and getting caught up in just some small amount of debris somewhere around the house that gets the initial house to start burning, usually under the eaves of the house. And then once one goes, they all go. But occasionally you'll see one house standing all by itself. Now let's look at this drone footage. This is shot by my friend Brandon Clement. He's a professional weather chaser based out of Mississippi. He was able to get the drone up the morning after the fire, just before the TFR, the temporary flight restriction, went up, at which time he was able to land his drone. But he captured the unbelievable destruction of these fires, these wind-driven events, and this just looks so much like the Paradise Fire and other wind-driven events here in California. Home after home completely wiped out. Again, once one of these homes catches on fire, when they're packed this close together in a subdivision, nearly all the homes go. And notice, too, how now these trees are terribly badly damaged and will probably end up dying anyways, but the fire is just moving through hot embers on the surface of the ground up to about waist high or a little bit higher. Those embers are catching little bits of debris located on the house, usually in the gutters or in these corners here, just enough to start the house on fire, catching them nearly all on fire. Unbelievable devastation. Again, in a wind-driven event like this, there's nothing first responders can do other than escape and evacuate people. With winds that strong, you blow your water out on the fire, and the wind's just gonna knock that water right back in your face. All you can do is get out of its way and wait for the weather to change. Again, there's absolutely nothing aerial assets can do in these wind-driven events. So thanks so much for your support of this channel, especially over on Patreon that make this content possible, as often tragic events like this are demonetized by YouTube. We'll have a chat with Brandon Clements and what he does as a weather chaser here soon on this channel. I highly recommend subscribing to his channel and supporting the work that he does, documenting the effects of these wildfires and extreme weather phenomenon across the country today. Thanks so much for your support. See you here.